Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Turber. We're going through! The commander's voice was like thin ice breaking. He wore his full dress uniform with heavily braided white cap pulled down recklessly over one cold grey eye.
We can't make it, sir. It's spoiling for hurricane. If you ask me,
I'm not asking you, Lieutenant Bird, said the commander. Throw on the power lights. Rifle up to 8,500. We're going through. The pounding of the cylinder increased. The commander stared at the ice forming on the pilot window. He walked over and twisted a row of complicated dials. Switch on number 8 auxiliary, he shouted.
switch on number 8 auxiliary, repeated Lieutenant Burke.
Full strength in number 3 turret, shouted the commander.
Full strength in number 3 turret. The crew, bending to their various tasks in the huge, hardly 8-engine Navy hydroplane, looked at each other and grinned. The old man gets through, they said to one another. The old man ain't afraid of hell.
So that's the end of exposition. I think it's very interesting because we can see we can find a lot here from settings and characters. I think it's very interesting. So let's start with the first one. I think I find is the figurative language of metaphor. On the line here, the commander's voice was like thin ice breaking. Thin ice breaking is the metaphor for being in a very fragile condition. So, what do you think, Haja? Do you find any other stuff?
Oh, so next I found about tactile imagery, which is when with the heavily braided white cap pulled down. So pulled down uses sense of touch, so it's basically tactile. So do you have any other?
Oh, I found personification. It's on the line. It's spoiling for a hurricane. Here, the hurricane is humanized with the word spoiling. Yeah. And then I think there's also another personification here. It's on the line. Rev her up to 8,500. Here we know that rev her up is pointing towards the aircraft itself. So I think it's very interesting that they use two personifications in one paragraph.
Oh yeah, right. Also I found about onomatopoeia, which is the tapake 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 tapake. So that is the onomatopoeia. And should we move on to the second paragraph?
Yeah, I think so. Well, here on the very first line, we see that the commander stared at the ice forming on the pilot window. Here we can see that the commander stared is already stated as visual imagery.
Oh, so I think that's interesting. Then I also found about tactile from the line switch on number 8 auxiliary. So this is basically because it's switch on. So basically it touched the button to switch it on. Yeah, right. So any idea?
Well, that's very interesting. Also, there's another metaphor here. It's on the word bending to the various tasks. Obviously, bending doesn't literally mean the crew members here are bending, but it is a metaphor for doing something or a task vigorously and focusedly. So yeah, what else do you think you can see here? Is there any other metaphors?
Sorry. From the last line of the paragraph, you can see the old man ain't afraid of hell. So that is the hell. The word of hell. It sounded metaphor because like it could not be true. It's that. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, and like hell, I think it refers to war.
Mhm.
So I mean, it depends on like who you ask, but war is not literal hell. But
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
But it's a hell for like people
Yeah.
who's going there. They would die.
yeah.
So I think that's quite like a lot of like in here because like there's only like two paragraphs. It's a short exposition, but we can find a lot. And I found another one, which is the character in here, which is the crew member the naval commander, which is a group of soldiers or sailors who obeys Mitty's every command as he navigates a storm in a naval ship. They showed respect and admiration for the commander.
Which is Mitty, right?
Yes.
I think that's interesting. But let's not forget there's also one more important side character here. It is our favorite Lieutenant Berg. I mean, as you can see, he clearly very much adores Commander Mitty here. And then I think if we look into it deeper, he can be symbolized as admiration that Mitty might have wanted for himself. Yeah, so I think we will discover more later.
Not so fast. You're driving too fast, said Mrs. Mitty. What are you driving so fast for?
Said Walter Mitty. He looked at his wife in the seat beside him with shocked astonishment. She seems grossly unfamiliar, like a strange woman who had yelled at him in the crowd.
You were up to 55, she said. You know, I don't like to go more than 40. You were up to 55.
Walter Mitty drove on towards Waterbury in silence, the roaring of the SN 202 through the worst storm in the 20 years of Navy flying fading in the remote, intimate airways of his mind.
Your chances up again, said Mrs. Mitty. It's one of your days. I wish you'd let Dr. Renshaw look you over.
Walter Mitty stopped the car in front of a building where his wife went to have her hair done.
Remember to get those overshoes while I'm having my hair done, she said.
I don't need overshoes, said Mitty. She put her mirror back into her bag.
We've been all through that, she said. Getting out of the car. You're not a young man any longer.
He raised the engine a little.
Why didn't you wear your gloves? Have you lost your gloves?
Walter Mitty reached in a pocket and brought out the glove. He put them on, but after she had turned and gone into the building, and he had driven on to a red light, he took them off.
Pick it up, brother, snapped a cop as the light changed, and Mitty hastily pulled on his gloves and lurched ahead.
He drove around the streets aimlessly for a time, and then he drove past the hospital on his way to the parking lot.
Is the millionaire banker willing to Macmillan? Said the pretty nurse.
Yes, said Walter Mitty, removing his glove slowly. Who has the case?
Dr. Renshaw and Dr. Benbow, but there are two specialists here, Dr. Remington from New York and Dr. Pritchard Mitford from London. He flew over.
A door opened down a long, cool corridor, and Dr. Renshaw came out. He looked distraught and haggard.
Hello, Mitty, he said. We're having the devil's own time with Macmillan, the millionaire banker and close personal friend of Roosevelt. Obstetriosis of the doctor track. Tertiary, we should take a look of him.
Glad to, said Mitty. In the operating room, there were whispered introductions.
Dr. Remington, Dr. Mitty. Dr. Pritchard Mitford, Dr. Mitty. I have read your book on traptoricosis, said Pritchard Mitford, shaking hands. A brilliant performance, sir.
Thank you, said Walter Mitty.
Didn't know you were in the States, Mitty, grumbled Remington. Close to Newcastle, bringing Mitford and me up here for a tertiary.
You are very kind, said Mitty. A huge complicated machine connected to the operating table with many tubes and wires began at this moment to go pocketa.
The new anesthetizer is giving away, shouted an intern. There is no one in the East who knows how to fix it.
Quiet, man, said Mitty in a low, cool voice. He sprang to the machine, which was now going pocketa, quip. He began fingering delicately a row of glistening dials. Give me a fountain pen, he snapped. Someone handed him a fountain pen. He pulled a faulty piston out of the machine and inserted the pen in its place. That we hold for 10 minutes, he said.
Get on with the operation, a nurse hurried over and whispered to Renshaw, and Mitty saw the man turn pale. Coriopsis has set in, said Renshaw nervously. Carapsis has set in, said Renshaw nervously. If you would take over, Mitty?
Mitty looked at him and at the craven figure of Bimbo, who drank and at the grave, uncertain faces of the two great specialists. If you wish, he said. They slipped a white gown on him, he adjusted a mask and drew on thin gloves. Nurses handed him shining.
Back it up, Mac. Look out for that book.
Walter Mitty jammed on the brakes.
Wrong lane, Mac, said the parking lot attendant.
Looking at Mitty closely. Gee, yeah, muttered Mitty. He began cautiously to back out of the lane mark.
Exit only. Leave her seat there, said the attendant. I'll put her away.
Mitty got out of the car.
Hey, better leave the key.
Oh, said Mitty, handing the man the ignition key. The attendant vaulted into the car, backed it up with insolent skills and put it where it belongs. They are so damn cocky, thought Walter Mitty. Walking alone Main Street, they think they know everything. Once he tried to take his chains off outside near Milford and he had to got them bound around the axles. A man had to come out in a wrecking car and unwind them. A young, grinning garageman.
Since then, Mrs. Mitty always made him drive to a garage to have the chains taken off. The next time he thought, I'll wear my right arm in a sling. They won't grin at me then. I'll have my right arm in a sling and they'll see I couldn't possibly take the chains off myself. He kicked at the slush on the sidewalk.
Overshoes, he said to himself, and he began looking for a shoe store. When he came out into the street again, with the overshoe in a box under his arm, Walter Mitty began to wonder what the other thing was his wife had told him to get. She had told him twice before they set out of their house for Waterbury. In the way he hated these weekly trips to town, he was always getting something wrong. Kleenex, he thought, squibs, razor blades, no toothpaste, toothbrush, bicarbonate, carborundum, initiative and referendum. He gave it up, but she would remember it.
Where's the what's his name? She would ask. Don't tell me you forgot the what's his name. A newsboy went by shouting something about the Waterbury trial. Perhaps they will refresh your memory. The district attorney suddenly thrust a heavy automatic at the quiet figure on the witness stand. Have you ever seen this before?
Walter Mitty took the gun and examined it expertly. This is my Webley Vickers 5080, he said calmly. An excited buzz ran around the courtroom. The judge rapped for order.
You are a crack shot with any sort of firearms, I believe, said the district attorney insinuatingly. Objection, shouted Mitty's attorney. We have shown that the defendant could not have fired the shot. We have shown that he wore his right arm in a sling on the night of the 14th of July.
Walter Mitty raised his hand briefly and the bickering attorney was still. With any known makes of guns, he said evenly, I could have killed Gregory Fitzhurst at 300 feet with my left hand. Pandemonium broke loose in the courtroom. A woman's screams rose above the bedlam and suddenly a lovely, dark-haired girl was in Walter Mitty's arm. The district attorney struck at her savagely. Without rising from his chair, Mitty let the man have it on the point of the chins. You miserable cur! Puppy biscuit, said Walter Mitty. He stopped walking and the building of Waterbury rose up out of the misty courtroom and surrounded him again. A woman who was passing laughed. He said puppy biscuit, she said to her companion. That man said puppy biscuit to himself. Walter Mitty hurried on. He went into an A&P, not the first one he came to, but a smaller one farther up the street. I want some biscuit for small young dogs, he said to the clerk.
Any special brand, sir? The greatest pistol shot in the world thought a moment.
It says puppies bark for it on the box, said Walter Mitty.
His wife would be through at the hairdresser's in 15 minutes, Mitty saw in looking at his watch, unless they had trouble drying it. Sometimes they had trouble drying it. She didn't like to get to the hotel first. She would want him to be there waiting for her as usual. He found a big leather chair in the lobby, facing a window, and he put the overshoes and the puppy biscuit on the floor beside it. He picked up an old copy of Liberty and sank down into the chair.
Can Germany conquer the world through the air? Walter Mitty looked at pictures of bombing planes and of ruined streets.
The cannonading has got the wind up in young relics, sir, said the surgeon.
Captain Mitty looked up at him through tousled hair. Get him to bed, he said wearily. With the others, I will fly alone.
But you can, sir, said the surgeon anxiously. It takes 2 men to handle the bomber, and the Archies are pounding hell out of the air. Von Richmond's circus is between here and Solier.
Somebody's got to get that ammunition down, said Mitty. I'm going over. Spot of brandy? He poured her drink for the sergeant and one for himself. War thundered and whined around the dugout and battered at the door. There was a rending of wood and splinters flew through the room. A bit of a new thing, said Captain Mitty carelessly.
The box barrage is closing in, said the surgeon.
We only live once, Sergeant, said Mitty, with his faint fleeting smile. Or do we? He poured another brandy and tossed it out.
I never see a man could hold his brandy like you, sir, said the surgeon. Begging your pardon, sir.
Captain Mitty stood up and strapped on his huge Webley Wickers automatic.
It's 40 kilometers through hell, sir, said the surgeon.
Mitty finished one last brandy. After all, he said softly, what isn't? The pounding of the cannon increased. There was the rat-tat-tatting of machine guns, and from somewhere came the menacing pocketa of the new flamethrower. Walter Mitty walked to the door of the dugout humming. He turned and waved to the sergeant. Cheerio, he said.
Oh, Brother Mablong.
Okay, so moving on. This is the
Rising action.
interesting. So, let's not forget about the main character first, which is the protagonist. Who?
Mr. Mitty.
Mrs. Mitty. What a Mitty. So, who is actually this man is?
Well, I think he's the main character and also the protagonist. And then if we mean he was the commander after all. And then here we can see Mrs. Mitty. She seems very like loving, very loving, very loving to her husband, and she knows that her husband is a bit of handful, especially when we look at the paragraph where she's a bit shocked and very and was panicking when he drove up to 55. Yeah, and then like this, I think it's very interesting. I think for Rising Action, it's gonna be one hell of a ride because it's very long, isn't it?
It is. It's pretty much almost the whole story.
Yeah.
So, I would want to see about Walter Mitty. So, his character is, he's an ordinary man, but he's very forgetful. So, he often dives into his fantasies because why? He needs to cope with his adult life.
I see. So it's like in the beginning of the story, we were already in one of his fantasies, is it?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Because like in real life, he is timid, he's passive, and also dominated by his wife. But in his daydream, he is like brave, intelligent, and also admired by a lot of people.
Every man's dream.
Right. So, you want to talk about Mrs. Mitty?
Well, obviously, Mrs. Mitty is Walter Misty's wife, but you can see she's a bit controlling and sometimes nagging to Walter. And she seems to always criticize him and reminds him to do errands and scolds him for his mistakes, which I think, on behalf of herself, I think it is well placed, well meant. Although the way of her doing it is she could do better, basically. Yeah. And then I think in Rising Action we can see that she symbolized authority and constraints of reality in Mitty's life. Yeah.
So, I found about simile in in the early part of Rising Action, which is like a strange woman who had yelled at him in a crowd. So, do you know why?
Well, I mean, is simile means that it compares two things using words like and and as we can see here, um, he's comparing the narrator is comparing her as grossly unfamiliar, like a strange woman who had yelled at him in the crowd.
Oh,
Yeah.
so any other? So, in the next paragraph, I also found about the visual, which is he had driven onto a red light. Why? Because we can see a red light that he just passed by.
So it is visual imagery, right?
Yeah, visual imagery, right? And then also there's a tactile imagery which Mitty has to put on his glove.
Oh, I see. To support that, here on the third paragraph, on the fourth paragraph actually, he's already inside one of his other fantasies, as you can see, and he's removing his glove slowly. This is tactile imagery.
Yeah, because he touched it.
Yeah. Okay.
Then there's also a metaphor which is we're having the devil's own time with Macmillan. So this is a metaphor because it's saying that they're having a bad time. They're having unpleasant time with Macmillan. So it's a metaphor.
I can imagine Mr. Macmillan is quite a handful, isn't he?
Could be.
Okay. And so does this other one I found. We should take a look at him. And then Mitty says, glad to. So here we can see it's a rhetorical question, even though there's no question mark. But if we read it, it is clearly phrased as a question, but without a question mark. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Moving on to the next part, we're gonna talk about the character in this. So the first character will be okay. So firstly, of course, I'm so sorry. What's Mitty? So he's imagining himself being a surgeon who is like one of the best surgeon that you can find that can treat a patient who is severely ill.
And apparently he had published a few books, isn't he? What was the book again? Here he says that they mentioned about the book that Dr. Mitty supposedly published called Streptococcus. Yeah. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Streptococcus? Is that it?
I think so.
Streptococcus. Something like that, I think. Sorry. And then, so about the patient who's severely ill, he's actually a millionaire banker.
Yeah.
His name is Wellington Macmillan.
Reminds me of my Wellington.
So, yeah. And then there's like a few doctors who is Dr. Remington, Dr. Benbow, Dr. Renshaw, and also Dr. Pritchard Mitford.
Oh. Okay, so let's do a deep dive on who these characters are. So, it seems that if we remember in the first few pages, his wife mentioned that I wish you let Dr. Renshaw look you over. And here, in his fantasy, he was mentioned again as Dr. Renshaw, who apparently was among the doctors that is handling this surgical case, I suppose. What else do you think?
And also, there are two specialists, which is Dr. Remington and also Dr. Bridget Whitford. They came all over from New York and London because they really admire Mitty's skills, so they want to meet him.
And let's not forget, there are also specialists. So obviously, they will be called to handle the millionaire banker Wellington Macmillan.
Which Mitty's skill, which will be performed by who? Walter Mitty, the great surgeon.
Oh my gosh! Right.
So, moving on, about I'm so sorry. This one, okay, about what idiom?
So here it says that calls to Newcastle, bringing Mitford and me up here for theatre. So if we look at the word calls to Newcastle, is an idiom. Basically means that doing something that is meaningless or have no point. Because if you look at the history of the idiom, basically Newcastle is a city in England, and they are oh my god, they specialize in producing coal. So basically, if you bring coal to Newcastle, it is not necessary because Newcastle is full of coals. So it's interesting because now when we understand the idiom, the whole sentence makes sense. From it is unnecessary to bring Mitford and me up here for theatre because let's remember Dr. Remington and Dr. Mitford are both specialists. So saying that even if they bring two specialists, Dr. Mitty is far more professional and have far more skills than the rest of the doctors there. No matter how you call them from London and New York. So it's very interesting.
That is interesting. So I actually found another onomatopoeia, which is pakata pakata pakata.
He seems really like to use that word, doesn't he?
But in this pakata pakata pakata, it symbolizes about the machines. The mission sounds.
I see.
So apart from like the first pakata pakata, it's about like the airplane sounds.
Yeah.
So it's different, but he still uses the same paketa paketa.
I see. Like, so there's also another one I see for figurative language here. There is no one in the East who knows how to fix it. It is referring to the machine that is doing or keeping Mr. Wellington Macmillan alive. And so it is a hyperbole because the word there is no one in the East is referring that it is exaggerating something that is not meant to be taken seriously, because obviously there might be people in the East, in the whole entire East of the world, that might be able to fix the machine, but technically there's no one in the room might know how to fix the machine.
Ooh. Then there's another word, the paketa paketa quit.
really likes-
Another onomatopoeia.
He really likes it.
He really likes that word. Okay, so moving on. Mitty saw the man turn pale, which is the visual imagery. Why? Because we can see. Sorry, not we. We can see the man turning pale. So it's by his eyes. He sees by his eyes, which shows the visual.
I see. And there's also another one. Here, when they slip a white gown on him, he adjusts a mask and drew on him glove. The nurses handed him shining. So the word shining here is a metaphor for the nurses handing him like a mask and a white gown for him to prepare for surgery, but admiringly because he took on this impossible task of doing surgery in 10 minutes.
Wow! Oh my god! In 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That is insane. Okay, so another one I found about personification, which is leave her seat there. Why? Let me explain why. So basically, her, the attendant is referring to the car. So it's a it's how do you say pointing to the car. So it's a personification. And there's another one too about I'll put her away.
Also referring to the car, I suppose.
Yes, I suppose so.
Oh.
And also there's hyperbole, which is the attendant vaulted into the car.
Obviously, the attendant didn't vault into the car.
So
So another one is where he says, but she would remember it. What's his name? She will ask, don't tell me you forgot the what's his name. So it's an euphemism because euphemism is like a good word to talk about something bad. So the what's his name is like a placeholder to fill out the thing that Walter Mitty didn't know, which is a bad thing if his wife finds out.
oh my god, he's very scared of his wife. Moving on. So another fantasy.
I really love his fantasy.
So should we start with?
So there's an idiom here. You are a crack shot with any sort of firearms, I believe. So the crack shot is an idiom for someone that is very skilled in a certain thing or profession. So it's an idiom for that. So it's very interesting to see. It's an informal language, obviously, but it's a idiom, no less.
So I also found about metaphor, which is speaking attorneys were stilt. This is a metaphor because they were obviously weren't still.
They were just quieted down, but it's interesting to see how wide the vocabulary of the author is. So that's another one I see. The pandemonium broke loose. Obviously, this is a hyperbole because the pandemonium refers to the ticking tension of like the environment and the situation, and then it just broke loose. So it means that like this this situation, this environment that was previously controlled just broke into chaos.
And there's also another metaphor, which is a woman's scream rose above the bedlam. So, it's just a metaphor because so basically, a bedlam,
A bad
bedlam. Sorry. So, it symbolizes about chaos. So when a woman's scream rose above the bedlam, it's just weird because like how can a woman's scream be like louder than a chaos? Does that make sense? It could be, but it's a metaphor.
Yeah, interesting. So there's also another one for visual imagery actually is the district attorney struck at her savagely. So it shows that the action of hitting someone savagely equals to hitting someone aggressively without constraint. So yeah, it shows how aggressive this is. There's also another one here about without rising from his chair, Mitty let the man have it on the point of the chin. So here you can see that Mitty punches the man in self-defense or to defend the dark-haired girl's honor. So it shows that this is also visual imagery because it shows how Mitty didn't stand down. Yeah.
About the district attorney, so she's actually a prosecutor who is aggressively trying to convict Mitty in his courtroom fantasy.
Ooh.
And also represent the opposition that Mitty heroically stands against.
I see. So do you think that it might also refer to his dilemma of like he feels wrong about the attendant being cocky and insolent, and also his insecurity for not being able to fix his car. I see.
And also, there's like the judge and the jury who's watching Mitty in the court. He imagined himself as a confident and misunderstood defendant.
I see. So let's move on to the next paragraph, where there's this word personification on the word. He stopped walking, and the buildings of the Waterbury rose up of the misty courtroom and surrounded him again. So it's a personification because obviously the buildings didn't just rose up out of nowhere. It's just and the action of surrounded him is humanizing the building to surround him. Obviously, the buildings can't do that.
And then moving on about the irony, this is the greatest.
The greatest pistol shot in the world. Yeah, it's So the great is irony because we know that he's a guy that wouldn't stand down for nothing from from what we see in his fantasies. He mentioned that he could have killed Gregory Fritzhurst at 300 feet with my left hand, even though his attorney was trying to defend him because he has his right arm in a sling. So it's very ironic because now he's like hesitating to think about the brand of a puppy biscuit.
From this paragraph, we can see that there's another character mentioning here, which is the shopping clerk. Why? Because the clerk, she served Mitty when he buys the puppy biscuits. And then let's just move on to the next paragraph.
Here you can see that there are two imageries. Yeah, there are two imageries. One is tactile, and the other one is also tactile. So the first one is, and he put the overshoes and the puppy biscuits on the floor. The action he put the overshoes and the puppy biscuits are tactile because he's putting down something. And then there's also another one. He picked up an old copy of Liberty. So obviously he's touching the old copy of Liberty and picking it up.
True. So in the next paragraph, I found about the idiom that got the wind up. So why is this an idiom? Because like got the wind up is like it's showing that he is pretty much affected by it. So yeah, it's an idiom.
It's an idiom. Oh, interesting. Okay. I've never thought it would be an idiom. It's interesting. Okay. So I think that's also another one here, but it's not an idiom. It's an hyperbole. Here, it says that it takes two men to handle that bomber, and Archies are pounding hell out of the air. Obviously, they're not like pounding hell. It's just the action of like pounding relentlessly. Yeah.
And after that sentence, we can find a metaphor there, which is Von Richmond's circus. It's between here and Solia. So I'll be passing it to you.
So we know it's a metaphor because von Richmond is obviously a German name, or an Italian name because it's von, but I'm sure it's German, and we know that Walter Mitty is an American, so he's a captain here and he's guiding his crew and to fight for the war, and he's referring that the circus of von Richmond as von Richmond's men, von Richmond's army. So it's like a degrading way to say it, but it is a metaphor.
I see. And then there's a metaphorical question.
Rhetorical.
Sorry, I'm sorry. And then next, I spot. Oh, a spot of Randy, which is a rhetorical question. There's a question mark there. So,
But he poured the drink, nevertheless, isn't he?
and also there's a personification which is was hunted and wine around the dog out and batter at the door.
Tu siapa?
But I was so. And then there's also about was handed and wine around the door and batter at the door, which is a personification.
I see. So I think we can categorize this into two, right? But it's still the personification.
Yeah, it's a two separate one, but it's still both are personification.
I see. So here you see that there's another rhetorical question in the new paragraph. Here it says that the box barrage is closing in, said the sergeant. We only live once, sergeant, said Mitty, with his faint fleeting smile. Or do we? So it's a rhetorical question, obviously. He didn't need the sergeant to answer it. Yeah, and there's also here where it's a metaphor. He says that it's 40 kilometers through hell. Obviously, as we mentioned, war is not like actual hell, but it is like it can be hell when people are involved in it and you fight in it. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you've ever walked through hell
Yeah.
for 40 kilometers.
I see.
And after that, there's also about rhetorical question, which is what isn't? I'm sorry. After all, he said softly, what isn't? The pounding of the cannon increased. So, this is a rhetorical question because he's asking.
He's asking that what isn't hell, isn't it?
Yeah, but he's referring to the hell, which is not. I'm sorry. It's a hell, but it's not hell. It's just hell.
Yeah. So I start another onomatopoeia.
But this one is different. It's rat-tat-tatting.
I see.
It symbolizes the sounds of the machine gun, of the pistols, of the bamba.
I see.
But I'm so sorry. There's another one. Poketa. I think at this point he's like very much obsessed with poketa.
It might be his trademark. I think, yeah.
There's like so many poketa.
And that concludes our rising action.
So we'll see next in our climax.
Yeah.
Something struck his shoulder.
I've been looking all over this hotel for you, said Mrs. Mitty. Why do you have to hide in this old chair? How did you expect me to find you?
Things close in, said Walter Mitty vaguely.
What? Mrs. Mitty said. Did you get the what's his name? The puppy biscuit? What's in that box? Couldn't you have put them on in the store?
I was thinking, said Walter Mitty. Does it ever occur to you that I am sometimes thinking? She looked at him.
I'm going to take your temperature when I get you home, she said.
So the most awaited part in the story has arrived, which is the climax. So climax actually starts at the second last paragraph, which is something struck his shoulder. I've been looking all over this hotel for you, said Mrs. Mitty. So this is like almost at the end of the story. You must be like wondering why this is actually the climax.
I do actually. I have no idea why.
So from this story, actually, from all the longest part is the rising action, and it only starts the climax here because Water Mitty, I'm sorry, it sounds like water. So Water Mitty, he finally realizes that is actually the problem here. So he realized that he just fantasized too much. So he said, does it ever occur to you that I am sometimes thinking? He said that to his wife, which is Mrs. Mitty.
And her response was that I'm going to take your temperature when I get you home.
Because obviously she thinks that he's not normal, he's not okay, which is but he definitely is, because he started to realize that he's a problem here. That's why. So this is the climax,
I see.
and that's the end of the climax.
So short.
We're gonna see you again in.
Falling action.
See you.
They went out through the revolving doors that made a faintly derisive whistling sound. When you pushed them, it was 2 blocks to the parking lot. At the drugstore on the corner, she said,
Wait here for me. I forgot something. I won't be a minute.
she was more than a minute. Walter Mitty lighted a cigarette. It began to rain with a slit in it. He stood up against the wall of the drugstore, smoking. He put his shoulder back and his heels together. To hell with the handkerchief, said Walter Mitty scornfully. He took out one last drag on his cigarettes and snapped it away.
So now we're back in falling action. Here you can see that it starts at they went through the revolting doors that made a faintly derisive whistling sound. Here you can see that it has personification because of its whistling sound for the doors. So it's giving humanistic characteristics to the doors.
And there's also an irony, which is I won't be a minute. She was more than a minute. That's very ironic.
It is verbal irony, isn't it?
Yep. And the following action, it ends. He took one last drag on his cigarette and snapped it away. That's the end of following action.
We'll see you in resolution.
The last part of the story.
Then, with that faint, fleeting smile playing about his lips, he faced the firing squad, erect and motionless, proud and disdainful. Walter Mitty, the undefeated, is corruptible to the last.
For the resolution. So, first thing, resolution, it started then with that faint, fleeting smile playing about his lip. He faced the firing squad, erect and motionless, proud and disdainful Walter Mitty, the undefeated.
Inscrutable to the last.
So that's the end of the story.
Quite dramatic, actually.
So actually, from this, there are the firing squad. Yes. So the firing squad is actually, it symbolizes the executioners. Why? Because the men who are about to execute Mitty in his last and most dramatic fantasy. This is the last fantasy of Walter Mitty in this story. So, why is this the resolution? Because it represents Walter Mitty's ultimate surrender to escapism, because he is now fully embracing his imagined reality, which is he realized that he's the bad one here. So yeah.
I think he finally realized that he can't do anything about it, actually, because he didn't really, in the end, stop his fantasies, or because he can't escape his dullness. So I think it might also symbolize that how he cannot escape his dull life, and he can't stop his very overactive imagination. So that is the end of our resolution.
So now we're gonna talk about real life settings, which is in Walter Mitty's real life situation.
Is it physical, historical, or geographical?
Actually, we have all of them.
Oh, interesting.
So for the first one, the geographical settings is actually in Waterbury, Connecticut, it is a small city in the United States.
I see. And I think for physical setting here, we can see that there are a few places that Walter Mitty visits, like the car, the streets of Waterbury, a parking lot, the store, and outside the hotel.
But that is the places he visits in his real life.
Oh, that's right.
And also, if it's in his fantasies, there's a navy ship in a storm, an advanced hospital operating room, a dramatic courtroom trial, a wartime airfield, and also a firing squad execution site.
Oh, I see. Let's not forget about historical. It is set in World War II because that will explain his military related fantasies. And it is during the Great Depression, well, actually, after it has ended. Mm.
So that explains it. Now we're gonna move on to the next one. So we're gonna explain about the character in here.
Oh, well, let's start off with our protagonist. We've already explained that Walter Mitty is, he's unconfrontational and he's timid, sort of, but he likes to argue, is that in his head. And then he is passive, even though he often doesn't agree that certain things should happen to him. For example, the scene where he had to unwind the chains from his car. Yeah, he is passive in that situation. Mm.
But in his daydreams, in his fantasies, he is more like brave, intelligent, and admired by a lot of people.
It's quite the opposite, isn't it?
Yep, totally.
Now let's go on Mrs. Mitty. Mrs. Mitty is his Walter Mitty's wife. She is controlling and someone who likes to nag and also takes him like a child. She constantly criticizes him, reminds him to do errands, and scolds him for his mistakes. She is the symbol of authority and constraints of reality in Mitty's life.
And then moving on, there's the crew members, which is from the first fantasy. Why?
Kita orang tak payah ni sebab kita nak buat discussion untuk tu. Yang kita nak yang masuk.
So that's the end of the protagonist and antagonist. We're gonna move on to
Characters such as ground character, flight character, dynamic, stock, static, and foil.
So first one would be the wrong character, which is Watamiti, because he is the only wrong character in the story actually. Yes, we can see both his real self and his fantasy self. It's showing his complex inner world. His personality includes timidity, dissatisfaction, and imagination, making him more than a one-dimensional character.
I see. I would say that Mrs. Mitty here is a flat character because she has only one personality trait, controlling and nagging. She doesn't show any personal growth or complexity, and she serves as a complete contrast to Mitty's imaginative world.
Oh.
Let's not also forget there are other side characters such as the parking attendant and the shopping clerk, who only appears briefly for the parking attendant to embarrass Mitty and showing his incompetence. He didn't actually show and came to embarrass Mitty, but we can see how Mitty was embarrassed of his own his own of his own lacking inability to just fix a car. And then the shopping clerk also only functions as a reminder of Mitty's mundane life. They both don't undergo any changes or complexity.
Then the next one with the stock character. So the military officers and doctors in Mitty's Mitty's fantasies, because they are idealized and exaggerated versions of authority figures. They act like typical soldiers, doctors, or courtroom figures, all admiring and praising Watanabe.
Hmm.
They also lack of depth because they only exist in his imagination, in his fantasy.
I see.
And there's also the beautiful woman in the courtroom. It's like the dark haired girl who shouted at the dam.
Okay.
So it's a classic damsel in distress character. She exists only to admire Watanabe, a common stereotype in heroic stories.
He does like to be heroic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dynamic characters, which is, well, let's say Walter Mitty, because we could say that he's a dynamic character because his fantasies become more dramatic as he grows increasingly detached from reality. However, he does not actively change the behavior in real life.
I see. Then moving on to static character, which is the character that stays the same. I would say that it's Mrs. Mitty because she remains controlling and dominant throughout the whole story. And the next one would be the strangers that Mitty encountered, which is the parking attendant, the shopping clerk, and also because it stays the same and it does not evolve.
I see.
And the last one would be Watanabe, but I would say that because he is static because he never truly changes. Like his real life situation, he keeps escaping to the fantasies instead of confronting his own problem. So he might be a static character too.
I see. It is seen in the resolution. However, he did try to confront, although there's no visible changes. Let's move on to foil character. Here we can see that Mrs. Mitty is a foil character to Walter Mitty because she is practical, bossy, and realistic, while Mitty is imaginative, passive, and an escapist. They're complete opposites of each other. And then her dominance emphasized Mitty's weakness in real life. And then let's not forget that the fantasy of Walter Mitty is a foil character to his own self because his fantasy version of himself is brave, heroic, competent, and more masculine, some would say, than his real life, which is timid and awkward.
Right. He's like he wants to show that he is great in his fantasies, while he's basically the opposite of that.
Don't we all think that sometimes?
Oh, how we expect to live in our fantasies. Now let's move on to the conflicts.
And let's start with the internal conflict of character versus self. Here, one of the most prominent ones is Misty's escapism, which is himself, versus reality. He constantly escapes into his fantasies to avoid his dull and controlled real life. He struggles to balance his imagination with reality and often getting lost in his daydreams at inconvenient times.
And also there's the fear of confrontation of Watanabe, which instead of standing up for himself, Watanabe passively accepts his wife's dominance. His fantasies allow him to act confidently, but in real life, he avoids conflict.
I see. Then we have external conflict. There are a few here, which is the first one is character versus society. Walter Mitty feels out of place in the world, as shown when people laugh at him, ignore him, or correct his mistakes. He is socially awkward and disconnected, struggling to function in everyday situations.
And the second one would be character versus character, which is Walter Mitty versus the wife, Mrs. Mitty. So because Mrs. Mitty, she is dominant and control over Walter Mitty's life, and she treats him like a child. She constantly scolds him for driving too fast, for forgetting the errands, not wearing gloves, reinforcing his powerlessness.
And there's also character versus character too. But this one is for strangers and characters that he meets along the story, such as the parking attendant who embarrasses Mitty by taking over the car when he fails to park it properly, and the shopping clerk that treats Mitty indifferently when he buys puppy biscuits, reminding him of his insignificance.
Is that all? Or are there like more to this?
I think that's all. Yeah.
So, moving on to the next one. So, the story is actually using the third person limited point of view. So, do you want to explain why?
Well, I think that because the story is written by us having the omniscient view of the character, but it is limited to only Walter Mitty's perspective, allowing us to experience both his reality and fantasies. We only know his thoughts, which make us sympathize with his inner struggles.
That's true. Um, there's also about the symbolism, which is what Mitty's fantasies symbolize his desire for control, respect, and also adventure.
The firing squad in his last fantasy symbolizes his final acceptance of powerlessness in real life.
So that will be all for the symbolism, and we're gonna go next to the
Tone and language. So now in tone and language, we can see that it is written in simple and direct language. The writing style is easy to follow, making the contrast between fantasy and reality more effective.
and also the dialogue is quite short and realistic, making that what is real world interaction, it feels like ordinary.
I see. And I think that will conclude our deep dive on the Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
That is pretty much a roller coaster, was it?
It is.
So that's the end of it.
Bye.
Thank you.